Hello, and welcome to yet another episode of the Back to the TARDIS podcast, the podcast where we take a look at every single episode of the 2005 revival of BBC's Doctor Who. I'm Jeff.
I'm Skylar.
And I'm Celeste.
And this week, we are discussing Series 6, Episodes 5 and 6, The Rebel Flesh and the Almost People, written by... Let me go pull this up.
Matthew Graham.
This episode introduces a minor piece of important things for the mid-season finale, which is up next, most notably being the gangers, this sort of replicant mass. This two-parter, the time before this, I watched this two-parter, and I kind of like it. I kind of started off like, hey, this actually isn't as bad as I remember, or it's got some interesting, it's got a great atmosphere. It's got some pretty good performances. And then as it kind of goes on, like the shit CGI really starts coming out, and it just falls apart.
Yeah, I'm very much along the same way. I was like, oh great, this has potential, and then it kind of floundered in several key areas, and I was just like, oh wow, it's Star Trek Voyager all over again.
Oh god, this does feel like a Star Trek episode, doesn't it? Oh man. Yeah, no, I remembered this one being good and one of our like favorites in the Matt Smith era. But yeah, it really gets you at the beginning, and I think that's probably why I remembered it being good, is because I just have the memories of like the majority of the first episode pretty much, and then somehow it just sort of like doesn't go anywhere with any of its ideas, and it just sort of like fucks around for a while. Like the pacing is really weird, and I noticed that because you get into what feels like the meat of the plot within about 15 to 20 minutes in the first episode, pretty much.
Yeah, and then it just kind of fucks around for a bit.
Yeah, and it's such a weird pacing, because I remember thinking like, this feels like this should be like the point you're getting to by like halfway, by like the end of the first episode. Like, how are they going to keep this going for like the whole rest of the story? And then they just sort of did, but not very well.
Yeah. So we open up with the cold open here, which again, like, this is a very good and effective cold open, where like, you know, it's people talking and having, you know, pretty like general worker person conversations, and they're clearly investing this vat of like some substance, and one of them accidentally gets pushed in, and they're very like nonchalant about their death by like dissolving through acid, which is this good, like, it's very like creepy and uncomfortable, and it realizes like, oh, okay, like it's some like copy body thing, which, you know, it's a good effective opening, and it introduces introduces the whole ganger ideas and the main cast for this episode very well. We move on to the TARDIS then, where Amy and Rory are vibing while Muse plays in the background. Honestly, pretty good choice. Another thing that I actually forgot about forgot about until these most recent watch throughs, is that it's clear that like 11 came here for a reason, and he doesn't want Amy and Rory to get involved because he's already sort of figured out that it's not the real Amy. Like, he knows, like, he doesn't know the specifics necessarily, and the reason why he's there is to investigate the flesh, but he gets there already knowing that something's up, and whatever here is probably the reason why.
Yeah.
It's weird to have foreshadowing in a Doctor Who episode. Like, just in terms of, like, story-to-story continuity. But yeah, I was paying attention for that and a few other things, because, like, I remembered that he knew. I just didn't remember it from the episode. So, yeah, there's some good bits there. I mean, this is so Stephen Moffat and so Series 6, but
yeah,
just looking into the behind-the-scenes stuff and seeing that Moffat contacted this writer to be like, hey, I just realized I need to have something to lead into my mid-series finale. Can you do this, please? And the fact that that writer had only done Fear Her before this.
Hey man, I am a noted Fear Her defender.
Noted, but it's not Satan Pit, Impossible Planet.
Yeah.
No matter how good you are, you're not going to be able to do the proper build-up. Credit to him. He does a good enough job. Like, at several points, I was, like, really feeling it. But at other points, I was like, man, you can tell this was just, like, something, like, someone was brought in here, and they wanted, like, Moffat and this guy wanted to go from point A to B to C to D, but they kind of, like, didn't fill it in all the way. I'm sure we'll get there, but that's the general feeling I had for this entire episode. Again, like, great potential, kind of falls short in a few important areas.
Yeah, it feels like they needed to get that checklist to set things up for the mid-season finale, and they're like, yeah, let's make a proper story out of this. And then they had the beginnings of a story, and then just had an ending of a story, and then just sort of stretched it out in circles for the 45 minutes in between that.
Yeah, definitely. So Amy and Rory and the Doctor step out onto this island with this, like, monastery building, and they initially think it's like, oh, it's like or Amy thinks it's like, oh, we're back in medieval times, which, first of all, Amy, that building wouldn't have looked like that in medieval times. It's clearly got centuries worth of wear on it. Secondly, Rory points out that he can hear Dusty Springfield.
Look, she's still a kissogram. She hasn't graduated to model and then to author yet.
I forgot about that shit. That shit's so ridiculous.
You're welcome.
Also, in all fairness, the medieval period was very long.
Yeah. Anyways. So, yeah. Oh, yeah. Also, yeah. Like, 11 is, like, straight away telling you, like, yes, these are gangers. They're not people, but they're almost people. So we are introduced to our cast. We have Jennifer. We have the one dude who's kind of an asshole. The dude who gets killed off super early. The Scottish dude who's actually the nice one around, and then girl boss of the week.
So true.
What is it with I've noticed there's a trend of, like, Doctor Who episodes that have these, like, cishet white women in, like, semi-powerful roles with it as, like, a side character in the episode, and half the time they're really chill, and the other half the time they're just a massive fucking asshole for no reason.
Yeah. Oh yeah, no. It's like, in this episode, this one in particular, like, Cleves is the instigator of half the time of, like, half of the, like, things that, like, arbitrarily pad out the runtime.
Absolutely.
Like, it is Cleves who stupidly starts all this shit for no reason, and it is Cleves who, the ganger Cleves, who keeps dragging it out, and then they shift that to Jen during her fucking baffling heel turn.
It's
but
it's a lot.
We'll move on there.
What was I? There was a thought in my brain. Oh yeah, just comparing this again, like talking about the potential that's missed here. I think back to something like the Satan Pit, like that two-parter, where like pretty much all of the side characters have some level of three-dimensionality and like feeling like actual people. Whereas here it's like we got Cleves, we got Jennifer Ganger, and then we have the guy who's a dad. Yeah. And then the other two are basically like
cannon fodder.
Yeah, they're like, oh, let's give him traits. He's an asshat, and the other guy sneezes. And I'm just like, okay, I guess you can do that. No one's stopping you.
Yeah. So the doctor, Cleves takes the doctor to this vat of stuff that looks like the goop that from like Westworld that like the Westworld androids are in. And basically explains this secret government technology that basically allows you to create to basically replicate yourself down to the cellular level and make this sort of artificial clone of yourself that you can use in dangerous jobs to make sure that you don't actually get hurt. Which honestly, the fact that this thing is a secret might be one of the worst, like most baffling plot holes of the entire episode, because no, it wouldn't be a government secret. Corporations would be demanding that you let them use that shit.
Yeah.
Like, no, like you wouldn't they like it wouldn't be secret at all.
I just
I feel like the social criticism falls a bit flat just because of that fact, and also like if it was a secret, it would take a lot to like acclimate people into that. Versus if it was just like a societally accepted thing. And just the weird level of like ganger racism that one person has versus the rest, it feels weird.
Like it makes the problem is, like, I agree, like one of the problems that I will get into later is how quickly Cleves just goes and everybody else just goes into yes, let's all murder each other, which really feels like it is more for plot contrivance than for anything else. Like, I would understand, like, one of the things that making it not be a secret would help was it would help establish it in the world. And if it is like a Westworld, I think it's weird because, like, it's not a direct comparison, but Westworld is actually a really good comparison because, yes, those androids are treated like shit because they are explicitly created to be in this theme park that is supposed to be so, like, rich assholes can come basically, like, do a bunch of not, like, illegal shit with no repercussions. Like, if you had actually established them in the world more instead of just being this, like, oh, they're this secret thing for work projects, and it's like they're treated as disposable but not as sentient, and I like that makes sense in the way that, like, oh, like they haven't been really sentient before aside from like some other workplace accidents, but like they're treated as disposable, but when they become sentient there is like weird unrealistic levels of people just denying them their sentience or like acknowledging that they exist. Which like human beings are shitty, but I feel like it would be hard to look someone like look a clone of yourself in the eye and deny that they are not in fact like an actual living being that is a person.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it would be like one thing if this was like a well-known thing that like happened sometimes and it was like societally understood that they still like quote unquote weren't alive at that point. Um
Yeah.
but that's not established at all, and it's like this is an unprecedented situation, and
Yeah.
for me it comes up across as like all very unrealistic that they wouldn't even like think about it for more than half a second, especially when they've got like a solar flare bearing down on them and like all this other shit like
Yeah.
It
Oh yeah,
felt
and like for example, I guess I can understand Cleves because she's like a Tory girl boss or whatever, being like super like, oh no, it's fine, they're not real, it's all fake. But the problem is that like nobody ever really like fights back or like doesn't be on like no one from the actual work crew really argues with her about that. It's just the doctor and Amy and the gangers, which like I feel like, for example, like Good Dad is one of the first because he has that conversation with himself where he realizes like, oh yeah, this like he recognizes that my kid is effectively also his son. But that doesn't happen until the last 45 minutes, and it's presented as a like, oh, you were actually all right all along. And I'm like, how did every single one of you just immediately like follow her on this?
yeah, there's some definite narrative shorthand and shortcuts that kind of make the again, it makes it lose it makes it fall short on the potential it has. And just with so many of the world building questions, like the doctor mentions that these are the flesh in the early days, we never see them again. Well,
Yeah.
okay, Doctor Who, it's fine, whatever, I'll ignore that for the time being. And then just one line that I actually like thought was interesting, but I just know I read too much into it, is when they finally call for help to the mainland and she's explaining what happens, and the guy she's calling doesn't even question it, as
Yeah.
if like maybe this does happen, they just don't tell other people about it. So like, but that's an angle they don't explore at all. Like that's just
Yeah.
something I picked up. They don't mention that at all. So it's like a lot of the interesting questions are sort of being discussed by the doctor maybe, and arguing against it with like the the ganger girl who turns evil and Cleves, but it's all very surface level. And I'm just like, I remember hearing the line of her saying like, oh, what are we gonna do, you're gonna have us sitting around playing campfire songs? And it's just like, why are you so hostile towards fucking campfire songs? Like,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, there's a solar flare. Like,
Yeah.
can we just deal with this shit later, please? But
Oh
no.
yeah, like the other thing is like, yeah, it's like everyone on that team that isn't Cleves is weirdly passive and just like lets her walk all over them. And the problem is that it's not necessarily a problem, but I think it should be established a little better. Like when Eleven's like, hey, there's a solar flare coming, you probably shouldn't do this now. And she's like, no, we need to get this done, otherwise we have to stay here even longer. And I'm like, do you people not have unions? I mean,
Or
probably not, but you could like establish that at least, you know?
also,
Yeah,
that's another point. That's another point where I'm just like, wait a second. I thought, because this story would make a lot of sense if this was like more under a corporation and less under a government. Because
Yeah.
at least in that way, I can understand like, oh, we're being held to the shitty mandate of the quarterly return, which, you know, side note, is probably one of the worst things that capitalism has done to us, is the quarterly return mentality. But like, it's the government, so you don't need like, I don't know, it's the script. Again, it's being like, we have to get from point A to B to C to D, but at the same time, I'm just like, this is just characters are being handed the idiot ball occasionally, and that's how we're moving the plot along. Like, that's basically the entire episode. The only smart thing that anybody does is the doctor, which makes sense, but at the same time, like, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's frustrating, as you're mentioning, Jeff, that basically everyone, so many people are devoid of personality and like just following under Cleaves's dictates, and It's just bad.
Yeah.
It's just not great character work to have so many of the characters be passive until they die or something else happens.
Yeah. Like
I
I
I feel
yeah.
like I feel like what we're getting here is like Doctor Genius syndrome, where like they need to keep proving that the doctor is like the most competent person around, and so to accomplish that, they make everyone around him more incompetent. Like,
Yeah.
because in RTD stuff, you have the side characters be like, obviously they can't be as like knowledgeable as him, but they keep up with him and they're
Yeah.
competent and stuff, and you get that in the Mars episode and the Mars colony story. I don't remember the titles. And then Impossible Planet Satan's Pit. And you get people around him that are competent and are able to keep up with him. And in this episode, it's like he walked into a room full of bickering children, and none of them just have any idea what they're doing. And there's so many things like what you mentioned. Like this would make more sense if it was just under a corporation. Like there's you sort of said like the doctor's asking the only one asking the interesting questions here, but he really doesn't. Like this episode is basically just like, what if there were people that didn't have rights?
Yeah, this shit is even dumber than the synth subplot in Fallout 4, and that shit's dumb as fuck.
I can confirm I recently completed Fallout 4 again, but yeah,
there are so many more interesting questions here that go unexplored because it plays for the like, what if these people didn't have rights angle instead of like, what does it mean to have another person that is a copy of you around?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, exactly. The minute it gets its most interesting, it stops, right?
Yeah.
Because we have that whole scene where they're all together and you think they might work something out. And the doctor's like, I'm not going to lie, this is a mess. There's a kid out there turning 5 who now has 2 dads, and not in the woke, cool way. He just has 2 dads.
Yeah.
So, like...
Yeah, and it's
how do you
like,
solve that?
I feel like the problem with this episode is that it could have been a more, like, talky-focused Doctor Who, but it decided to be bombastic and, like, horror-y, which, like... There's potentially some interesting, like, horror ideas that you could have gotten from that, but yeah. And then, like, for example, I will say, like, ironically, like, the Cleves Ganger is one of the most well-realized characters because at least her actions after, like, Cleves kills one of the gangers, like, her actions after that are in character for Cleves if she was on the other side, which in this case she is. Like, that's good, but the problem is still that nobody ever, like, no one on the team ever really goes against Cleves.
Yeah, Jennifer is the most well-realized character outside.
And then she has her stupid heel turn and turns into a bad CGI monster.
It's so I looked into the behind the scenes stuff because I'm surprised there was more depth and thought put into this, but apparently that character was originally there was supposed to be some exposition about Jennifer having an eidetic memory, which meant that the reason that her ganger remembers everything the Flesh has been through.
See, that's the problem that I was actually, when we got there, I was going to bring that up as my main problem with that scene, is that is not like, it is not brought up until her heel turn. Like, if it was mentioned before, I probably wouldn't have nearly as much of a problem with it, but the problem is that it isn't. It is not ever like brought up before it's like, oh, it's time for Jennifer to turn into a bad CGI monster. She could remember it the whole time. And it's like, of all the things in this meandering ass episode that you cut that?
Yeah, there's so many baffling choices. It's sad. Again, the only thing I give this episode credit for is that the Doctor's plan on being like, okay, I'm going to see, like, can someone truly see one of us as can see like a ganger as human. So they do the switch. That's like the most clever thing that this entire two-parter does. And that's sad. Like, it's well executed, but it's sad because there's so much other stuff that could be explored with this idea that they just don't, because they have to get them to a point to have an us versus them mentality.
Yeah.
For some goddamn reason. They even repeat us versus them as if it's some clever philosophical mantra, and I'm like, no, you idiots, you didn't do any of the work to get there.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Yeah, the thing about this episode is that I think every actually interesting question it brings up is answered better in the Zygon two-parter.
Yeah.
Like literally
Probably.
all that's done well in here is done way better in the Zygon two-parter,
Yeah.
and everything else is just sort of a complete fucking mess.
And like the other thing that the problem that this also raises is that when you have it, so basically all the gangers are either actively fighting against the main cast or just like not involved with the main group like Jennifer is, except for the Doctor's ganger. It perpetrates the same problem where the Doctor is just inherently better than everybody else in the episode and is like basically trying to play like annoyed school teacher trying to get fucking little Timmy and little Billy to stop being shits to each other.
Yeah, there's also, I mean, we're jumping all over ahead, but I don't think this episode deserves like a play-by-play. But what bothers me is that the two, I almost called them synths. Wow.
Because that's basically what they are.
Yeah, but the synths are better. I'm sorry. Anyway, the two gangers that end up living only live basically as a sort of, oh, you'll do type of thing. Because for the one guy, he gets like killed by the acid, and the other guy like sacrifices himself to save everybody else. Which, okay, I guess the sacrifice is noble, but it just thematically like betrays an idea of like, well, the originals matter, but if they're gone, then the replacements are fine. You know, it doesn't read. I know the episode is trying to tell me that they both have the same worth, and honestly, the Doctor Ganger subplot does that the best. Again, sadly, but like everything else is just saying like, okay, the humans, like, they were here first, but if they're gone, you'll do. And that's not the message you want from this episode.
Yeah, the one thing that really put me off was Amy being a dick to the Doctor Ganger. And that just, I don't know, it felt out of character to me.
Yeah, definitely.
Again,
like,
one of those points where it's like, oh, we need to get from A to B, and they don't exactly cheat, but the only reason she really starts going against him is because the Doctor has that strong telekinetic like connection to the flesh, which you could argue shouldn't be happening if he's the real Doctor. I kind of headcanoned that to be like, well, the real Doctor would have stronger telepathic senses because he's used to it, and the others' senses wouldn't be as strong. But again, that's me explaining something that the episode just doesn't bother at any point to do. So, yeah, there's a lot of moments that you could make a list of moments where things happen for basically no other reason than the script needs them to happen for this story to continue. It's really, really obvious. And I don't know if that's the fingerprints of Stephen Moffat being like, I want these beats in this episode to get to here, or if it's the fact that this writer wasn't prepared to write a two-parter. Like, I don't know what it is. It's just, it's so weird to have so many instances of this within a single episode.
Yeah. It's weird. You know what else I just realized? Out of the two, like, specifically, like, gangers that live, like, yeah, you have, like, the dad who, like, yeah, that makes sense. But the other one is the most fucking, like, the one with the guy with the least screen time in the entire, like, I fucking forget that dude is, like, exists. Like, I have to remind myself of, like, oh yeah, that guy was there too.
He's the guy that sneezes, like,
Yeah.
until the end, and then he's the guy that sacrifices himself, and I'm just like, what the fuck was that even for? They fridge the most interesting side character when we find out that the human, or I guess the original Jennifer, is dead.
Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah, that just like, yeah.
So, and we haven't even touched on this. Oh my god. The fact that they thought they needed to have a subplot where Rory cares about someone and Amy gets slightly jealous.
Yeah, it's like, this is a good moment for Rory and no one else.
Yeah, it's like, again, reading the behind-the-scenes stuff, it was like, oh, Amy has always had Rory kind of in the palm of her hand. What if the situation was reversed and, like, Amy for once felt how it was for Rory to see her, like, pine over the doctor? And I'm like, okay, that's an interesting idea, kind of, not really. A little bit too late for that, but sure, fuck it, whatever. Maybe don't do that in this episode where it's the last time they're together before they find out the traumatic thing at the end, which is that she's been stolen from them.
And it's also, it feeds into a problem of, like, I really like Rory, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that he's still written well, and Arthur Darvill has a lot of charisma and is really good. But the problem is that even after he joins as a companion, Rory's role in an episode is almost always defined in relation to Amy. Like, it doesn't feel like he is an equal third member of the team. It feels like there is the Doctor, there is Amy, and then there's Rory.
Even then, I was again looking at like production and like behind the scenes stuff to see if this was like a series 5 script or something, because at the very beginning they like kind of do that thing where it's like, oh, you haven't been here as long, which is when the Doctor says, like, positions, Amy and him know what to do right away, but then Rory is just kind of confused for a second, and I'm just like, are we still doing this bit?
Yeah.
Almost halfway through the second series. Like, I mean, I get he's been erased from existence for a couple episodes, but Jesus.
Yeah.
This episode is all over the place.
Yeah.
It's sad because, again, there's some great stuff here. It's just, the most enjoyment I got out of this episode was about speculating about the world building and asking myself the interesting questions that this episode doesn't ask.
Yeah. I feel like not only did this need to be handled differently, I also feel like the Flesh deserved more appearances than this, because the problem is that this is all that we have, so it really just makes it seem like Moffat came up with this idea for A Good Man Goes to War and then was like, ah, shit, how do I make this make sense in the universe? Like, it feels super messy, and like this interesting, like, I guess, sub-race was created not because of like anything interesting that Moffat had to say, but purely just, yeah, I need this introduced so I can come up with a plot twist in my dog shit next episode.
And credit to RTD for the Ood in actually like deciding to follow up on that shit.
Yeah.
Granted, it was like, it isn't the most fleshed out race in Doctor Who, but still, it's like, you kind of.
But it's an example, and he came back to it.
Yeah,
like,
exactly. And here
like,
it's just like,
it's
we
worth
never
saying
see them
that the Ood are a race that even like at least in RTD's era he came back to, and even though they're generally used just because they don't want to come up with a new monster design for the week nowadays, when they show up, it's still the like created by RTD credit in the fucking like credits. Like, oh no, wait, yeah, he has. I was about to say Stephen Moffat hasn't come up with the monster like that, and then I remembered, yes, he has the Weeping Angels, but that's different. Shush.
Yeah, and then I got even more mad because I realized this is just all to like.
It's all to build up to the end, the almost like the right before the end scene where like the scene happens that caused Maddox to make a joke that got him canceled on Twitter. That's it. It's all just for that.
Yeah, I just
like
the fact
you
that
could
all this
basically
boils down to is a plot device and a plot contrivance and like a whole thing for the next episode to be like, oh, you thought you won, but here the baby's gonna disappear. Here's some more trauma for this actor and this character, and I'm just like, can we please fucking not? I'm sorry.
Yeah. It's like it God, what was I gonna? Oh yeah. I feel like if I was showing Doctor Who to my friends, which I probably will at some point, because it's just gonna happen inevitably. But like, I feel like I could skip this episode or like fast forward all the way through to that last scene and just explain like, oh yeah, it was a duplicate copy. They explain where the duplicate copies were from in this episode, but it wasn't like that. It wasn't that it's not a very good episode, and you wouldn't really lose anything.
Also,
because it's just explaining where the fact that, oh, it's a duplicate copy came from, which honestly, you know what? I've come up with a suggestion right now. What if instead of doing a whole episode here, or maybe you could still maybe do a whole episode here, but instead of this being the first sign you see of them, bring that idea in throughout the season.
Yes.
Like have a couple have a character in an episode that's like have it show up a couple of times throughout the series and have it be like a minor recurring thing. And then maybe you can still like go to like a more flesh focused story like to lead up to it, but it would also feel a lot more natural here.
Yeah, there's so much. By the way, this is a wild thing. I've heard this episode referred to as a pro-life episode of Doctor Who, and I'm just like, shut up, you don't know what media comprehension is. But
yeah, no, if you want to make that argument, make it for Kill the Moon like the rest of the fucking normal people.
Yeah, exactly.
We'll get there.
But yeah, just have this come up sooner, lay more seeds. And okay, I'm debating if I want to get into this now or in A Good Man Goes to War. And I guess I'll get into it more now because it like relates more. I get the Doctor says this is flesh in the early days, but you're telling me that by Kavarian's time, she's able to send a signal to keep this Ganger Amy going through a fucking time machine that can go any goddamn place in the universe, and probably the multiverse as well. It's just like, you have a signal in your rinky-dink human technology bullshit church ship that can broadcast that through a frickin' TARDIS through to the point where when the TARDIS goes outside of the universe to visit House, it's still working. Like, I know this is Doctor Who and the shit gets ridiculous, but like, I'm sorry. This is too ridiculous even for this show. It's just... yeah. I don't know. I kind of appreciate the attempt to do some type of continuity before the mid-series, like, finale. But at the same time, they just
and don't get
floundered
with
it.
the mid-series finale that I will have some very strong words for next week.
Oh, same. Yeah, it's just... Yeah, I don't know. It just seems like they could have saved a lot more work for themselves if they just... And I know Doctor Who has never been especially, like, string continuity. It's never gone from, like, one storyline to the other perfectly. But I guess my critique regarding this is, if you're going to have a story that requires you to do it, then don't half-ass it.
Yeah.
Don't be like, okay, we're going to introduce this in the 2-part beginner of the series, and then we're going to touch on it again the episode before the mid-series finale. Like, that just... I don't know any universe where that fucking works.
And I mean, like, I don't like the Dr. Donna shit, but that is 100% set up and foreshadowed earlier on in the season. And that is an equally thing that's like, this is a, like, plot thing that will be relevant later that needs to be, like, set up. And it's actually set up. Like, Donna can hear that heartbeat multiple times earlier on, and Dr. Donna friend is repeated numerous times in Planet of the Earth and other places, as well as the idea of them basically being pulled together. Like, there's intention there. And the thing is Moffat has literally, you said it earlier, he went off on, like, oh, I've come up with this brilliant idea that Amy was this duplicate all along. But the problem is that he did that and then realized, oh shit, I haven't set this up and I don't have time to go back and set it up throughout the episodes that we've done.
Yeah, it felt like with the weaker series arcs that we've covered in Doctor Who, at least there's been enough episodes that even if they did the bare minimum, by the finale, it still felt like some type of, like, meaningful reveal and meaningful, like, engagement with the series arc. And here, it's like he shot himself in the foot by saying, okay, we're gonna do that, but, like, halfway through the series, and not properly accounting for that. And I'm not saying that... Look, if you combined the storyline of A Good Man Goes to War and The Wedding of River Song, that would have been a fucking mess, no matter how you did it. But I could at least envision it being more, I guess, satisfactory and better, like led up to in a few ways. I don't know. It's just... This episode makes my brain hurt.
This season, I think, is the season of biting off more than the writers could chew. And, like, because, like, you have all the arc stuff. Series 7 has its problems, but generally it's either, like, pretty bland or just has an arc that's not interesting at all. This one is... Moffat really... went all in and went, like, okay, like, we managed to keep this show going through a major stylistic and staff change from the way it was when it was brought back. Now basically, how do I top myself? And, like, it feels like he was so focused on, this is just going to be the biggest, craziest season ever. And, like, it had all this marketing push, and they went to film in America, and Neil Gaiman wrote an episode, and we had all these guest stars, and there was this crazy arc, and the Doctor dies in the first episode. But the problem is that he went in so far that I don't, like, I feel like he just put shit down on paper before he, like, really went in and thought about, like, how any of it would work.
Yeah, this feels like... And I know you could argue Doctor Who's done event television before this, but this really feels like someone trying to do, like, Mandalorian MCU tier level storytelling, bells and whistles, without the, like... infrastructure or, like, proper planning to do that. And, you know, the series 4 finale is a goddamn mess that barely works. So,
but, like, it works better than this. And I feel like it's weird because in some ways it's both larger and smaller scale, in that it doesn't quite feel as grandiose, but it's larger scale because it's actually... Like, the problem with, like, A Good Man Goes to War, that, you know, I'll just spoiler alert for next week that we'll just get into. The problem is that it feels like he's trying to do a Journey's End where he's like, yeah, I'm calling in all the Doctor's friends and whatever. And admittedly, Jack was supposed to be there initially, and he couldn't make it because John Barrowman was busy filming on Arrow. But everybody else are fucking randos that, like, we will see again. But this is the first time, like, Vastra and Jenny and Strax, that's the first time they show up.
Yeah. Ugh.
So it's just like, you tried to do what RTD did with Journey's End, but what made Journey's End work, in quotation marks, because, you know, I have my problems with that. But Torchwood was set up, Sarah Jane Adventures was set up, and obviously you had previous companions that you were bringing back. Like,
yeah.
You didn't have to worry about doing all the legwork in this season because you'd already done some of it in prior seasons.
Also, just trying to do this while also doing Sherlock. I don't know if he was just like, if that was a position he was forced into, or if at this point he was kind of like drinking his own Kool-Aid in like how clever he was.
Drinking his own Kool-Aid.
Yeah, probably. It's just, I wish we had gotten this type of Moffat in the Capaldi era, and you could argue we kind of did with the hybrid, maybe. I don't know if I believe you, but I don't know. I think if he had waited and established his own era more, instead of trying to do all the legwork in this episode, which is fine. I know I've been complaining about it, but it's like, I was honestly entertained. There's some good, like, Matt Smith Doctor moments. There's some good, like, small character interactions. Like, even despite all that stuff, it's just, his own ambitions overshadow almost everything in this series, no matter how good or how bad it is. And it's kind of sad.
Like, one of the best things about The Doctor's Wife is how relatively untied from the rest of the bullshit it is. It's just a good standalone episode. And the annoying thing with this season is that after that mid-season split, episodes just being normal, relatively detached episodes starts being a downside because it feels like they're ignoring shit that shouldn't have been ignored. Like, you go from Good Man Goes to War, like the 1-2 punch of trash, but like arc shit that A Good Man Goes to War and Let's Kill Hitler is, to fucking Night Terrors.
Yeah, it feels, again, I'm going to tie it back to Star Trek, and maybe Celeste might disagree with me on this, but this feels like the same level of, like the story arc of The Year of Hell feels like it should be this, like, huge, important thing, and it's basically led up to, like, sort of, barely, and is like a two-parter, I think. It's been a while since I've watched Voyager, but The Year of Hell storyline reminds me of this a lot, because it's built up to be like this, oh damn, like this is gonna suck, or like this is gonna be some momentous event, and then it just kind of isn't. Like, it's okay, but it's not what you were kind of picturing. So yeah.
I get your point. I will say that just like using the Year of Hell two-parter on its own, it's in my opinion very good, but I'm not going to start reviewing a Star Trek episode right now. I get your point. Yeah, no.
Yeah, it's just like, yeah, I honestly feel like this kind of, like, we are reaching, like, this story and then the next two stories are just like the encapsulation of everything that was going wrong with the show for this season. And the funny thing is that Series 7 is going to be a completely different set of reasons why things were going wrong. And then the show actually gets good again.
Yeah.
And then it gets worse.
I think a recent show that's kind of mastered this type of storytelling of having side stories but still connecting everything in a way to making it feel like it all matters is honestly The Mandalorian. And again, you know, you can tie some of that to the character being a bounty hunter, and like this is how he makes his way of living, so he goes to these different places, he does a job, and he gets some information that like propels him on his quest. But honestly, the format isn't that too different from Doctor Who if you just boil it down to the Doctor goes someplace, gets some information, and like if there was a sense of the Doctor having a more active role in wondering what the fuck was going on with Amy, instead of just like a scene at the beginning or end of an episode of him looking concernedly over at Karen Gillan.
Yeah. Or at the monitor, yeah. Or at the monitor of his own death. Yeah, that's pretty much all it turns out to be. And it feels even more just awfully like it feels even more like awfully contrived than like all the times the crack showed up last season.
Yeah. Yeah, that was... And here's another thing that I just forgot about until this now. It feels like it should be a momentous occasion when the Doctor realizes that, like, Amy has seen him die, but she tells him that straight up, and that's just kind of, like, not a thing that we hear him talk about, and it's not acknowledged that this is where he finds out about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I forget that she tells him, because, like, yeah, he just spends the rest of the time looking at the monitor of his death, and yeah, it just, all of the emotional beats for this just feel so fucking borked. Anyways, anything else before we move on to ratings?
I will give one positive note. Actually, there's a few positive notes, but one thing I will unironically give this episode credit for is that the use of angles and camera tricks and, you know, body doubles and all that stuff to pull off having a lot of scenes where there's, like, quote-unquote the same people in the same room are actually pretty well done. Like, for a TV show of this era to get all of it and have it look mostly seamless, like, none of the CGI or, like, shot compositing is in those shots. Maybe when the Doctor is, like, standing right next to himself, it's kind of, like, a little weird. But for the most part, the bad CGI is on the bad CGI
It's the
monster.
bad, like, pointless Jennifer monster that's like, oh yeah, we need a monster at the end.
Yeah, God. But, like, aside from that, like, the compositing and, like, the making the doubles work is an actual positive note I will give this episode. So, props to the director. Whoever you are, you made this episode that much better.
All right. So yeah, horribly contrived, doesn't go into nearly as much detail or interesting territory as it should, feels like an hour and a half time waster to explain one thing that could have been explained more economically a different way. Send in another draft out of 10. It's not done yet. Put it back in the oven.
This episode is not good.
I need to edit an explosion after you say that now.
Anthony Fantano, please don't sue me. Seriously though, it's... On one hand, I admire this episode, and on the other hand, I just think this was the wrong time to try something like this for what it was. Like, well-intentioned, but just kind of falls apart at the end. All the social commentary is half-baked. Every time they get somewhere interesting, it's just like, it's us versus them. Why? It's like, they wanted a war, they'll get one. What do you mean? Only one person shot you. Everybody else seemed like they were chilling. Like, just, wow. The best part of this episode, and there is a best part, is the Doctor acting alongside himself. I could actually buy 11 getting along famously with himself.
Oh yeah, and that kid's pretty good.
Yeah, the kid actor, the son, that's good. There's some core emotional moments. There's some moments of intrigue, but for a two-parter, I just think it's like too little. I think it's pretty much the perfect encapsulation of this series being the one where the creators bit off more than they could chew. I think that's this episode in a nutshell. So,
Yeah.
yeah, this episode is not good.
Could have been a memo. 5 out of 10.
Damn, man.
True.
Anyways, next week we will be discussing the mid-season finale, A Good Man Goes to War. Until then, you can follow us on Twitter at B2TARDISPod. You can support us on Patreon for a number of benefits, such as early access to episodes, the ability to listen in live to episodes being recorded, and potentially even the ability to guest star on an episode of your choosing. I'm Jeff. You can follow me on Twitter at WheatleyDL.
I'm fucking tired. You can find me on Twitter at skyhigh9_5.
I'm Celeste. You can find me at Nesquixotic.
And we will see you all next week.